Welcome, everyone. My name is Tess Granach, and with me is Leah Honor, and we are the Research Data and Scholarly Communications Librarians here at UMass Chan. You may have realized that you need an NIH Data Management Sharing Plan, and you've come to the right place, because today we'll be discussing the new NIH requirements and how to meet them. We'll be sharing a copy of these slides along with the recording, so look for the link to the slides. At the end of today, I hope that you will understand why data management and sharing is important and learn some definitions behind the elements of an NIH data management and sharing plan and understand the steps of drafting a plan in DMP Tool. Let's start with the big question. Why worry about managing and sharing research data? For three very good reasons. It makes your life as a researcher easier, funders require it, and it's the right thing to do. How does it make your life easier? Managing your data will keep you organized and more efficient. You'll be able to find your files when you need them, and you'll avoid data loss because you'll know where you've saved your files and what version they are. You'll satisfy legal obligations, such as data management mandates that come with funding, and having clean and easily shareable data sets can easily lead to increased citations and credit for your work. And having that clean and organized data will make life easier for others, such as grad students who take over a project from you or try to build on your data in the future. The second reason is that funders require data management and data management plans. Specifically for today's workshop, the NIH has recently set a new policy that will become mandatory on January 25th, 2023, requiring the submission of a data management and sharing plan, as well as compliance with the submitted plan. This new policy replaces the 2003 NIH Data Sharing Policy. Why is the NIH implementing a new data management sharing policy? In the words of Lisa Federer of the National Library of Medicine, data sharing is essential to more rapid translation of research results into knowledge products and procedures to improve human health. This vision is at the core of the new policy, but the new policy also seeks to instill good research data management practices and equitable, accessible sharing of NIH-funded data for the purposes of advancing rigorous and reproducible research by allowing for the validation of results, promoting equitable access to research, and providing citation and collaboration opportunities for researchers. It also promotes public trust in scientific research by demonstrating transparency and accountability, good stewardship of taxpayer funds, and maximizing the contributions of research participants. How does this new DMS policy relate to previous policies? As mentioned earlier, the new policy replaces 2003 NIH data sharing policy, and the new DMS policy will not override or replace policies that specific institutes, centers, and offices may already have in place, but rather incorporate those policies. The new NIH DMS policy represents the minimum requirement for all NIH grants, and individual ICOs may provide more specific guidance. For example, instead of writing a separate genomic DMS plan, you will now write an NIH DMS plan that includes the requirements of the genomic DMS policy. We've listed a few of the institutes and centers that have existing data sharing policies on this slide. For a full list, please visit the URL at the bottom. So what research is covered by the new policy? The policy applies to all NIH-supported research that results in the generation of scientific data, regardless of funding mechanism or proposal budget dollar amount. This means that the new policy does not apply to research and other activities that do not generate scientific data, such as training, fellowship, and infrastructure grants, including all T, F, CO6, R13, G, and SO6 grants. For a full list of grants that the policy does apply to, please refer to the NIH site on research covered by the policy.
Let's move in a little deeper to discuss the elements that go into the NIH Data Management and Sharing Plan. These elements are discussed in full at the link on the bottom, but we're going to give you the highlights. The 6 topics needed to be covered are data type, related tools, software and code, standards, data preservation access timelines, access, distribution, and reuse considerations, and oversight. The basic purpose of the data type section is to briefly describe the scientific data to be used, managed, preserved, and shared. Before we jump into the details of that, let's look at the definition the NIH provides for scientific data. They're referring to the recorded factual material commonly accepted in the scientific community as of sufficient quality to validate and replicate research findings, regardless of whether the data are used to support a scholarly publication. I find that slightly vague, but here's what they say that scientific data is not: lab notebooks, preliminary analyses, case report forms, paper drafts, future research plans, peer reviews, communications with collaborators, or physical objects. So they're really talking about the data collected that is supporting the work described in the grant proposal. And in the DMS plan, they want some details, such as the type and amount of data you're planning to collect. Is it fMRI data? List that. Genomic data? List that. Explain what the data will look like when you share it. Are you going to share individual results, aggregated results, and how processed will the data be? What data is going to be preserved and shared? There should be a brief description of the metadata, which is the data about your data, and any associated documentation that will be shared, such as study protocols that might also be made available. What type of documentation you might want to include when you share your data? Some possibilities are a metadata schema, a Readme, or a data dictionary. If you've never heard of metadata before, it's the information that we create, store, and share to describe things. It's often called the data about your data. Find it throughout information systems, such as a library catalog, and it's structured to some degree, meaning that specific details are collected and stored. Things like title, author, or descriptions. A Readme file is a text file that contains information about other files in a directory and how those files are organized. A data dictionary is another metadata collection tool, which represents the structure of your data set. Each row in the data dictionary, which is generally organized as a spreadsheet, corresponds to a field in your data entry form and provides a detailed description of each variable, such as variable name, meaning, units, and format, permissible values or ranges of values, any known issues with the data. Are there any systematic errors or missing values? The relationship to other variables, and any null value indicators. Some research data collection tools, such as REDCap, generate a data dictionary for you based on your data collection forms, so that you can reconstruct your database fields if you needed to. Note that a data dictionary does not include any of the actual data that you have collected. On top of data that you create, you'll need to describe any sources of secondary data you may be using. You might be thinking that this sounds like a lot, and it can be, but the NIH doesn't anticipate that all scientific data from a study will be preserved and shared. There are legal and ethical considerations, such as for human subject data.
Next up in your DMS plan should be the discussion of related tools, software, and code. If someone wanted to use your data or even look at your data, would any special programs or tools be needed? And if you can share in a spreadsheet form, will it be stored in a format that's open, like a CSV file instead of an Excel file? If you're written or used code to process your data, is this openly available? This section really needs to explain what your data will look like when it's shared and whether or not it will be easy for others to make use of it. In the standards section of the data management sharing plan, you'll need to indicate what standards will be applied to the scientific data and associated metadata, such as data formats, data dictionaries, data identifiers, definitions, unique identifiers, and other data documentation. While many scientific fields have developed and adopted common data standards, others have not. In such cases, you can indicate in the plan that no consensus data standards exist for the scientific data and metadata to be generated, preserved, and shared. Regardless of the scientific field, the data formats that offer the best chance for long-term access are both non-proprietary and unencrypted and uncompressed. File types such as MOV for video, WAV for audio files, and CSV for spreadsheets. Chances are that your scientific field already has a metadata standard or schema that you can use, so you don't need to create your own, and it will make your data more interoperable with other data from your field. To help find the standard for your discipline, there are 3 directories maintained by different groups: Disciplinary Metadata Registry, maintained by the Digital Creation Center, the Metadata Standards Catalog, maintained by the Research Data Alliance, and fairsharing.org, which is a registry of standards, databases, and policies. The repository where you want to deposit your data will also probably have their own metadata standard as well. So knowing that what metadata the repository needs at the beginning of your project will allow you to collect that metadata needed as you complete the project, making data sharing so much easier. An example of a metadata standard that many UMass Chan researchers are familiar with is the minimum information about a microarray experiment, or MIAME, which is used by GEO, the gene expression omnibus. Comprehensive data documentation, or metadata, is the key to future understanding of research data. Without a thorough description, it is unlikely that the data can be easily discovered, understood, or effectively used. So what details should you be including in your metadata? Specifics on the digital context, the investigators and stakeholders, the scientific context, and the parameters of the data are all good places to start. And anything else someone needs to know to better understand the data. A good rule of thumb is to write your metadata for a user 20 years in the future. What will the investigator need to know? Prepare your data and documentation for a user who's unfamiliar with your project methods and observations. In other words, the types of things you would want to know when faced with an unknown data set. Not only is such information incredibly useful if you're sharing a data set, but it's also useful if you plan to reuse a data set in the future or you're working with a very large data set. Basically, if there's a chance you won't remember the details or never knew them in the first place, a data dictionary and other data documentation and metadata is needed. Across most metadata standards, there are general fields that are shared, such as title, creator, author, description, and format. And if you are going to develop your metadata standard for your lab or project, these are some fields that you might want to consider including. Where formal metadata standard exists, or you're looking for a low-tech tool for recording metadata, writing Readme-style metadata in a text file is an appropriate strategy, at the very least for internal use. This slide shows the beginning of a Readme-style metadata file. You can find a similar template and examples on the resource guide linked from this page. The template opens up a text file that you can download to your computer and fill in. Just as there are a number of standards available to help determine the metadata fields that should be included, there is software and a number of other digital tools that can be employed to create and manage metadata content. There are specialized tools, such as the DataCite Metadata Generator, which is a single HTML form which can be used to generate DataCite metadata in XML form. Some of these specialized software and tools are being developed right here at UMass Chan, such as Omega and the Micrometa app from Dr. Strembu de Castilla's lab, and DMeta from the Dolphin Suite, created by the Bioinformatics Core for genomics and transcriptomics. You might also find the right tool for you on this index of metadata tools from the Digital Creation Center in the UK. Automatic metadata is also generated from a number of tools, such as microscopes, cameras, and other instruments. Another data standard that is increasingly mentioned in funding opportunities is Common Data Elements, or CDEs. These are standardized fields, questions paired with a set of specific allowable responses, which can be used across different studies to ensure consistent data collection. They are both human and machine readable and can be a single element such as blood pressure, height, etc., or a group of elements such as a survey instrument, such as the quality of life scale. Overall, CDEs facilitate reproducible research and meta-analysis. You can search for CDEs in the NIH CDE repository and also browse CDEs by the NIH agency or center. Another great thing is that CDEs can be directly imported into REDCap. If you import from FieldBank, you would then select the NIH NLM catalog, and you can select from all the NIH CDEs.
The next section is data preservation, access, and associated timelines. This section should include the repositories where you will archive your data, how the data will be findable and identifiable, such as persistent or unique identifiers that will be used, or where the data will be indexed by the repository, and when other users will be able to access the data and for how long. The timeline for release may be different for subsets of the data, which you would describe here as well. How do you choose which data repository to deposit your data in? First, check to see if your funder states in the funding announcements or on their website about requiring a particular repository for data funded by them, or if they have any recommendations. You can also check if a journal you're interested in publishing in has any specific requirements. If your funder does not have a specific data repository requirement, does your discipline use a specific data repository? We always recommend looking into depositing your data there because the repository will be better aligned with your data and other potential users will be more likely to find it there. Your institution or your collaborator's institution might also have an institutional data repository that will accept your data. You can find a number of subject data repositories and generalist repositories by searching on these two registries, re3data.org and fairsharing.org. Some examples of disciplinary repositories are listed in this filterable list maintained by the NIH, which can be found at the link shown. Here at UMass Chan, we can accept datasets into our online repository, EScholarship at UMass Chan. If you would like to include EScholarship in your data management and sharing plans, we have language that you can use in our data deposit policy. If there is no domain-specific repository, some generalist repositories that NIH recommends are Dataverse, Dryad, Figshare, OSF, Vivly, and Zenodo. We've talked about where you'll deposit your data, but you also need to include when you'll deposit your data as part of your data management and sharing plan. The NIH wants scientific data funded by them shared as soon as possible, no later than associated publication or the end of the performance period, whichever comes first. Some awards might have more specific guidance. Publication is not necessary to trigger the sharing requirement. Journal data sharing policies may also dictate when data should be shared. Quite often, they require that data is shared for peer review or by the time of publication. I've linked some examples of data policies on this slide. Something to keep in mind when looking at repositories is that some will allow you to embargo data from public sharing. The last part of this section is how long your data will be available. The appropriate time frame varies across disciplines. However, some policies you will want to refer to are data repository policies, award recommendation requirements, and journal policies. The next section of the NIH DMS plan is access, distribution, and reuse considerations. In this section, you'll need to account for any delays or restrictions on sharing that you need for your research data due to federal, tribal, state, or local regulations, policies, and laws for ethical, privacy, and confidentiality protections. There may be several factors that determine the amount of data access, distribution, and reuse, including limits on data sharing based on the informed consent provided by the participants. So make sure that all of your consent forms allow for appropriate data sharing. What measures will be taken to protect the privacy and confidentiality of participants, such as any de-identification measures? And will any controls be put in place to access the scientific data derived from humans? Will any future data users need approval from the repository to access the data? Restrictions to data sharing, such as HIPAA or data use agreements you may have signed or need to sign to use the data for research. Oversight of data management and sharing is in the final section of the NIH Data Management and Sharing Plan. This will discuss how the plan is going to be monitored and who is going to ensure that the plan is followed and how often it will be checked. Keep in mind that plans do and will change, and what you provide as part of your grant proposal can be updated as needed.
The NIH is aware that the extra effort to manage data as specified in DMS plans are going to take some time and resources on the part of researchers, so they have outlined some of the allowable and unallowable costs that can be included in grant budgets. Reasonable costs allowed in budget requests include curating data, developing supporting documentation, formatting data, de-identifying data, preparing metadata, preserving and sharing data through repositories, and local data management considerations. Something to keep in mind is that all allowable costs must be incurred during the performance period. Unallowable costs include infrastructure costs, typically included in indirect costs, and costs associated with the routine conduct of research, such as costs of gaining access to research data. There are resources available at UMass Chan to help estimate the costs associated with your DMS plan. Reach out to the library for assistance selecting and estimating costs associated with a data repository and reviewing your DMS plan for costs you may want to consider. Reach out to the IT Research Services for assistance choosing and estimating costs for UMass data storage and software options. And reach out to the Research Informatics Core for estimating costs associated with sharing clinical data, including de-identification. But please reach out to any of these questions early in the process. Overall, your plan can be a maximum of 2 pages and is included with your application. The NIH Program Officer assesses the DMS plan and may suggest or require revisions before funds are awarded. However, the DMS plan will not affect the proposal score. The NIH recognizes that staff and research plans may change throughout a grant, and revisions can be made to your DMS plan throughout the project as part of the Research Performance Progress Reports. RPPRs will also be used to monitor compliance with the plan. The DMS plan is incorporated into the terms and conditions of the award, and compliance may factor into future funding decisions. The NIH has provided a draft version of the DMS plan to use for formatting purposes. A live fillable version is in the works, but not yet available. However, there are tools that can help. To help create data management plans, you can use the DMP tool, which UMass Chan has institutional access to. So to access DMP tool, you would go to dmptool.org and sign in with your UMass Med email. And it's going to prompt you to use your UMass Chan username and password to log in. So when you first log into DMP tool, you're first going to come to your dashboard. And if this is the first time you're logging into DMP tool, you won't have all of these different DMPs started, and you'll want to go ahead and create a plan, which is right at the top there. And when you create your first plan, you're going to want to type in the title of your plan. So in this case, maybe you want to just test out the new NIH DMSP. And if you're just testing, you can select this checkbox here to indicate that it is a test project. And if you've logged in with your UMass Chan email, it'll automatically select UMass Chan as your organization. To select the NIH DMS plan template, you will need to type in NIH as the institution, and it will show up. And then you can select from the different NIH DMP templates. In this case, you're going to want to choose the forthcoming 2023 plan and go ahead and select Create Plan. Now, I've already created one, so I'm just going to go there from my dashboard. And so it'll automatically have filled in your project title from the previous screen. This is where you can type in the abstract and a little bit more about the funding information. You can also share your DMP template and plan with your project contributors and collaborators. So they can edit it as well as just view the plan to give their feedback. Under the Write Plan tab is where you'll actually be writing the plan itself. And you can see here that it's broken into the 6 sections required by the NIH. And within each section, there is some helpful descriptions of what you need to include, as well as example answers and guidance from the NIH and DMP tool, as well as, when relevant, guidance from UMass Chan as well. Another great part of DMP tool is that you can request feedback directly in the DMP tool itself. So if you select this request feedback button here, somebody from the Lamar Suter Library will get back to you within 48 hours to indicate and confirm that we have received your plan and that we will be reviewing it within 10 business days. The NIH has also put together some very helpful resources to help you with the NIH data management sharing policy, which are available on the sharing.nih.gov website. And it includes guidance on the NIH policy, as well as FAQs, recorded webinars and training videos, news and updates, and much more. The library has also put together a resource guide collecting all the resources and information we have discussed here today. There you can find links to tools, recorded webinars, and quick reference materials, as well as forms to request more training or DMS plan draft reviews. We've already mentioned the library, research technology group, and research informatics core as great resources to reach out to for support when writing your DMS plan. Other groups at UMass Chan that you may want to reach out to are the Institutional Review Board for questions about how to incorporate data sharing language into your informed consent, and the Bridge Innovation and Business Development Group for any questions you may have about intellectual property being produced as part of your research and how that may impact your data sharing. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at datalib@umassmed.edu or schedule a follow-up session for you or your research group to get more one-on-one assistance. Thank you, and here is our contact information. And if you forget everything today and only need to remember one thing, if you have any questions, look for the Ask a Librarian button on the library website and submit your questions there. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.